Hey, well, thanks for coming, you guys, everyone here. This training, post-construction stormwater, it's complicated, it's nuanced, it's new to some people. I feel we've been working in it for several years and it's not new. A few reasons for this training. I mean, it's new, we haven't done one in a while. We're updating our procedure memorandum from 2019, so it's a little over 3 years old, so it's finally getting an update. We're trying to simplify it a little bit. And another reason is just as part of our compliance with the regulations, we need to do training. So you being here and documenting the training definitely helps the county to remain compliant. Some of the designers, those involved with design, some people in here are in this a lot and are familiar with it. Others probably less familiar, or might even be new. Like these requirements impact projects. All types of projects that we do within our county. So it's good for everyone to hear this. So we have questions. So, I mean, thanks to Ian Gillespie, JR, Aaron, and Jeffrey for putting this together. Ann couldn't be here today, so JR, can double thanks to him for covering extra slides. And so they're going to do their best to answer questions. But they have a lot of knowledge. Obviously, there's something that we need to follow up on, check in with Ian, we'll do that as well. So thanks again, and do you want them to ask questions during, or I'll let you guys cover that?
Yeah, so questions afterwards, yeah.
Afterwards, okay.
Yeah.
I'm distracted.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is J.R. Beard. I'm with Public Works Development Services. And Gillespie, who couldn't be here today, as John mentioned. So I'm covering our slides, so I'll try not to quickly just sleep with all the talking I got to do for that portion. We're today talking about the D-30 Design Procedural Memorandum Update, which we kind of went through and got it from the original one to make it more current to today's time with the various requirements the Water Board has that we've picked up through, unfortunately, notice of violations and dealing with other agencies. So it's now more current and hopefully easier to read and use for your projects. So overall, what are we covering today? We're going to be talking about the Municipal Stormwater Permit Program Overview. We're going to talk about the D-30 with regards to introduction, updates, and the processes associated with what we've done to it. Also, post-construction stormwater planning and site design. And then project documentation and permit review. And also very important, use my laser for this, operations and maintenance considerations and processes. All right, why do I need to know this and why now? Compliance with the Central Coast Regional Post-Construction requirements is mandatory. It's much more than a symbolic low-impact development. In times past, there were interim LIDs, but now it's much more comprehensive and more specific. And failure to incorporate into project planning dramatically increases project costs. How does that happen? Well, beginning of the project, if you're not taking stormwater into account, when you get through your 30, 60, 90% PSNEs and you are just now thinking about it, you're going to have cost implications at that point. So it's very critical to think about it early on. And what's the other thing? Well, we got new projects, right? We got new facilities that are rolling out. It's exciting times for us. We have, of course, new staff. And very important too, we have new resources to help support this compliance with everybody.
All right. Compliance with what? Coastal?
Regional coastal? The PCRs, post-construction requirements.
For the what?
Well, you have the, yeah, we'll cover that actually more specifically. Bear with me, Steve, we'll get there. All right, so the overview. Here we go. So we have the state permit, which authorizes the county to operate a stormwater drainage system that discharges to natural waterways, first and foremost. To comply with the permit, the county must also meet numerous requirements to protect water quality. This permit also covers developed portions of unincorporated areas. Each city has their own jurisdictional area, like you could think of the city of SLO has their own MS4 coverage area, Grover Beach, Tascadero, and etc. Additional to that, so what else is part of this permit? Well, think of good housekeeping practices with the county facilities. When you're thinking about waste management, pesticide, herbicide management, equipment maintenance. conducting public education and outreach about stormwater. This is very important for the internally and externally for everybody to know what the requirements are of that. Maintaining the system to respond to illicit discharges, which can be spills or dumping of storm drain systems. We want to consider cleaning and maintaining storm drains and reducing the amount of trash discharged through the drainage system. Very important here, laser, implementing a post-construction stormwater program to manage runoff volumes and prevent water quality impairments. That's kind of key. That's really what we want to focus on. We want to make no questions. We'll get there. Actually, Jeff, do you want to go ahead and ask the question?
Just on your prior slide, you said each of the cities have their own PCR requirements for facilities more than that infrastructure. Who's are going to, if we're working in the city of St. Louis, who's are going to apply? Ours or the cities?
Great question. So ultimately, it's kind of an agreement between the county and the city. The county is going to enforce it for county projects. So that's the important distinction. If it's a county facility in, say, city of Dover Beach, we're going to be the ones that enforce that. Thumbs up. All right, so where does it apply? Okay, so we have the county's municipal permit. It's basically it's determined on census data. So like in urbanized areas, you're definitely going to see that. That's why the cities have it specifically to them. But also you're going to see it in like the unincorporated areas of the county, which would be related to urban and village reserve lines. You can find that all later that we'll discuss. But it does not include all county unincorporated communities. Again, we'll talk about that further. So this isn't throughout the county, it's just for portions of the county, and again, based upon census data. So all incorporated cities are covered by the same type of permit, same type, it's basically the same regulations, same requirements. So where do we find this? So GeoWorks is our handy tool for this. So, Public Works, of course, this is resident of Public Works. So Parks is dealing with the project manager in Public Works. We can look this up in GeoWorks, which has a layer for the MS4. That's what this is, this MS4 area. We can look it up and see the jurisdictional boundaries of that MS4 when the project is in there. And in the, as we're going to introduce today, the internet, we have a great resource, has a step-by-step instructions for where to look this up and how to determine that. Okay, other scenarios required in PCRs. The Water Board has PCR compliance if, there's compliance required if we're receiving one of their permits. So for instance, a bridge construction. This is going to be basically case by case. We have a 404 cert, then there are certain PCRs that may be triggered as part of that. Same with like projects constructing new outfalls to waterways, projects that impact the bed or banks of a creek or waterway. So this is applicable just not for MS4 areas, just to say that, put that out there. Okay. So just in case you're thinking, hey, stormwater isn't really my thing. Well, guess what? It is going to be your thing. So we have this list of 3 questions. I don't really need to know this. It's not applicable to my project. Someone else will make sure this is taken care of on my projects. If it could possibly rain at that site, guess what? It is going to be your responsibility to take that into account and determine whether or not it's going to be applicable. If your project disturbs existing area, it's going to be applicable. It needs to be evaluated. Something else is going to, make sure it's taken care of. Unfortunately, not. We as the county are responsible for administering this. So you as Public Works and other departments are required to be subject to this and make sure that it works. Here's a big one. Regardless of cost, this is a requirement. So that's why careful site evaluation and planning can yield substantial cost savings. Where you site your projects can be very beneficial to help be more economical for the project, so to speak. And Aaron will present later on how that can be accomplished. There are no feasibility exemptions. That's also important to keep in mind. I know people would like to say, hey, this site's infeasible. That's not necessarily going to be the case. The Central Coast Water Board has authority to audit all related records for projects, public or private. So that's the big one. That's where they audit a project and they determine that it's out of compliance. That's where the violation kicks in. So you have to be cognizant of that. Notice of violation letters, stemming from these audits can be very time consuming for staff, thousands of dollars, because hours upon hours can be required to justify what the county may have approved or not approved, or installed or not installed. So you got to be very cognizant of that. And man, so post-construction stormwater compliance is the primary audit item in the Central Coast region. We get a notice of violation, that's because they're looking at our projects or projects that we've approved and all. So it's critical to be on top of these things. And content. All right, these are similar. So capital improvement projects, facility projects, are very similar to private development and development services. So my team handles the building permit process and subdivisions, curb and sidewalks. So we get all of the development side of the community, coming into us for ensuring design compliance. So how's it similar? So the private side, as well as us, we're all subject to the California Construction General Permit. We're also subject to the Central Coast post-construction requirements, the MS4 areas that we're talking about. So the process, building permit application process, you can see this when Public Works submits to the building department because of a facility project or a parking lot project. You're going to have your project plans, you're going to have your building permit application, SWCP, the application or waiver. You have your environmental clearance, that's going to be required. And if the project is large enough, there's serving more than an acre, the SWPPP. And then other forms or documents like structural cows. What other documents the building department would require. As far as capital improvement projects for like transportation projects, you think about roads, bridges, also we have parks projects, airports projects. So we know how that, and those get internally routed to the various departments and divisions. We're going to have project plans, SWCP, the application or waiver, and then SWPPP, things are required. If it's a disturbing over an acre, and then also your environmental clearance. So similar items, right? Makes sense. So for compliance, we're kind of looking at the project execution plan, project charter. So basically the feasibility portion of the project through to design, through to construction, through to maintenance. So that's the chain for providing guidance in this document for your projects. Project tracking, the PWD Capital Projects Database, this can be used for, and this is what we're going to use it for, is extrapolating or pulling information out for these projects that are located in MS4 for annual reporting. And then also we have forms and templates that we can get with these projects. The tree on your desktop, it has many useful purposes, but specifically, you can go to the tree and see the post-construction stormwater requirements. And this has all the available information for you guys to use in your project development. So internet resources. First thing is you get this decision tree, this graphic, that covers either the state, the California Construction General Permit, your MS4 PCRs, and also like your local drainage and flood control items. To break this out a little bit more, so for the general permit, you can see, this is a statewide permit. The county is subject to it as well as the rest of the state. This is governed by the Water Quality Board. Construction general permit, that's a document that you can go to read through that. And then, so with the document that would be generated, if your project generates more than an acre, it's going to be an SWPPP. So the next one is what we're talking about today are the MS4 areas where you're going to trigger these PCRs. So you have the applicable area is going to be essentially municipal phase 2 stormwater permits, also known as MS4. Water board, again, is the governing jurisdiction, but important distinction, the county is the administrating body for these, which is why each and every one of us is responsible for doing our due diligence and making sure these are done correctly. You have the reso with the appropriate action for that. And ultimately, that could be a stormwater control plan with the application or a waiver part of that process. Last but not least, the other stormwater component or flood control component is like the local drainage and flood control requirements. Now, this is for the unincorporated areas of the county. The county is, in this case, but County of San Luis Obispo is the governing authority. You can refer to the public improvement standards for the guidance on that. And ultimately, a drainage report would be created out of that as needed. So, important distinction, the drainage report is different than the stormwater control plan, which can have calculations in it based upon treatment or volumes or so forth. Two distinct separate documents that are reviewed. All right, internet resources. So if you go to that website, you can pull up very quickly this D-30 to go through and guide you through the process. In there, you have the application forms, the templates, and everything that can help you with your project. You have useful links, so you can determine if your project's located in MS4, WMZ, which we'll get into a little bit later too, because there are different requirements for WMZs, and then rainfall depths, and a lot of other things. So quick resources, to get to the construction general permit, as well as the MS4, the post-construction requirement resolution by the board. All right, so this is important to note. I included this because these are details, but they're guidance only. And why do I say that? Well, if you get into a situation where you're putting in a curb and gutter, next to a roadway and a bioretention basin, you're putting surcharge load on that curb and gutter, which means you actually need to design that curb and gutter that's going to ultimately be like a small retaining wall. It's important to note that because I just went through that with the project. So what you don't want happening is a failed road section because your curb decides to collapse into a bioretention area because of the soft or media that's in there. So guidance only. As I should note, so the questions, so your SMEs, who the other centers we have Karen Yonker and Jeffrey Santa Nicholas. Those are your SMEs and myself as well. You'll notice that Anne is not on that list, so she's like a last resort to go to. So you'll come to one of the three of us prior to going to Anne. We should be able to assist you with your project needs. All right. I don't know if I've lost anybody yet as far as going to sleep, so keep on pressing forward. So I'm covering multiple slides here.
Joe, that is a good point as far as the subject matter experts. Anne is really our county-wide stormwater coordinator, so she has a lot of roles, and she's a good resource. But first stop would be Jeffrey, JR, Aaron, and they're going to be able to help guide the vast majority of the questions. And we have Jeffrey can help with development services and in design, Aaron in project delivery, and Aaron in development services. So we have have good broad-based coverage there for a system. And even if you're outside the department, just reach out about a project and what might be required.
Yeah, so important to note that. So I'm just going to do a basic overview of some of these documents just so you know what they look like if you haven't seen them already. This waiver request form is there. I know that's a kind of a go-to document for a lot of folks, and it can be, if your projects are in an MS4 area, less than 2,500 square feet, you get a waiver. There's also other criteria for getting that waiver, as far as parking lots and road maintenance, also waivable. And then below that, you also get these other waivable items here. Just one thing to note too is that these, as written, are black and white. For instance, the curb and gutter. This one here, curb and gutter improvement or replacement projects that are not part of any additional creation or replacement of impervious surface areas. What does that even mean? That means if you're tacking on a sidewalk to a curb and gutter project, not waivable. So very black and white how these are written. Here's what the stormwater control plan application looks like. We've gone through some recent updates, but it's kind of handy because you can quickly identify, square footages and then what performance requirement is going to be required. The update that we added is this little section here. So this, performance requirement 1, site design and runoff reduction summary. So what we've done is added these two columns. So if you are going to be clicking yes or checking yes to one of these items, if so, what's the detail number? Where's the sheet location? If not, tell us why. Because again, all our projects are subject to audit by the water board, so they want to see justification as to why each of these things was not correct.
Is the water board, have they seen this template of ours? Or is it
They have, yes,
Right, this is an agreement with their ways.
kind of happened in our last, yeah, so our last, because we do annual reporting, so with the last reporting, we are sharing with them, like, you know, we did training, we updated our forms and all these other things. So there's a number of items that we're checking off and when we submit for our annual report, so they have seen it. They really don't pay attention to unless they're actually auditing something. Stormwater, okay, so this is the stormwater control plan template. So this is a Word document fillable by the design professional. It's a good basis to start the project. In this, there's one thing that we did modify, which is, it's kind of key, a lot key, if you want to think about hydrologic soil groups. So you have A through D. Soils that are soils A, you have great infiltration rates. Soils that are C and D, you get horrible infiltration rates. It'll be a little bit, it'll definitely guide your design as far as, you know, retention, detention, types of things. So that's important to kind of think about as you're going through this. We'll go into that a little bit deeper. All right, so as was mentioned, you know, for quick reference, Aaron Yonker, project delivery, Jeffrey San Nicholas, design and construction, and myself for development services are your subject matter experts. So if you guys have any questions, you know, we'll be your first point of contact for discussing those things. Okay, on that note, here we go. Now it's Jeffrey San Nicholas presenting this section, what's required for my projects.
Doing. As Jared said, my name is Jeffrey San Nicholas. I'm one of your SMEs from the previous slide. My background is in development review for the most part, especially building permits. So I've been applying and wrestling with the development-related stormwater requirements for about 4 years now, and I'll be the first one to tell you that they are fairly convoluted and confusing. So I'm right there with you. I'm going to be talking a little bit today to try to break those down for you. So that if you have a project, you can quickly identify which requirements you're going to apply. Just how to get started and then how to fill out the documents you need. So the post-construction stormwater requirements, the requirements are all based on impervious or permeable surface. The regional board roughly defines that as any surface that's been treated in some way so that water can't infiltrate down into the earth below. So if you're saying impervious, permeable, kind of the same thing. Whatever project you're working on, you're going to have requirements if you're in the MS4 area, permit area, based on what we call your net impervious area. And it's pretty straightforward mathematical calculation. New areas that are impervious plus replaced minus reduced. New, too hard to understand here. If you have undeveloped, undisturbed, permeable area, and then you pave like a new road that wasn't one before, that would count. Undeveloped site, you're adding a new building, that would count. So yeah, pretty straightforward. It's a little tricky. Replaced areas that count. Impervious areas that make whatever parcel you're working on, projects that make it more more impermeable than it was, those would count. If you have a gravel base parking lot, pave it over your asphalt, you know, water can't percolate particularly well through base, but you can't get through asphalt. So if you were doing that, it would count. This one's a little tricky if you're changing line and grade. I like to just say that if your runoff's going somewhere it wasn't going before, that would count. So your vanilla overlay projects typically don't count because the road is just as impermeable afterwards as it was before. Now, if you're overlaying a road that was slope to one side and then crown it, you have water going places it wasn't going before where it could carry pollutants, that would count. So it's pretty specific. Jeff, questions?
Just like, I've seen agencies where asphalt parking and they're just going to do dig out or that'd be a replace. Even though it's in kind of.
We can talk about that one after. I mean, for the most part, if you're patch repairs, you're putting it back to the same line. that's why it's lined in gray. You're returning the finished surface to where it was before. And you haven't generated any more impervious surface. That would typically not count. If you're digging deep enough to a certain level where it's like reconstructed pavement, there is some gray area where those start to count. But you can talk about that after. But reduced areas, pretty simple. If you were doing a parking lot job and you paved off some stalls or something, scarified added vegetation. So afterwards, we have less impervious surface. You can get a credit for that, and then have less stringent requirements because. So you new plus replace minus reduce. That gives you your net impervious surface of your project. And based on that number, you can tell what your requirements are going to be. So within the permit area, the MS4 areas we were talking about, in the eyes of the regional board, at least your project is small potatoes if it's 2,500 square feet or less. It's not large enough to create big enough disturbance that you would need to mitigate the eyes of the board. So if you're in that bracket of small projects, no requirements, you're good to go. There are, as Garrett mentioned, a few categories of projects that the water board waives as well. Solar projects, utility projects, Steve, small pavement repairs, those would be waived as well, just by definition. So anything in here, you don't have requirements. If you're over 2,500 square feet, you're going to fall into one of these 4 boxes. There are 4 what we call performance requirements. So performance requirements PR is 1 through 4. And they're assigned based on project size, they're brackets, and they stack as you go up. In this kind of small bracket, 2,500 to 5,000, the requirements of the project is that you add what we call a runoff reduction measure. It's usually a token vegetated area, a little landscape area, some pavers, something that shaves some runoff from the project. It's got to be consistent with what we call low impact development, LID. So it's generally got to be something that's vegetated. Pretty straightforward. PR2 is the next bracket, 5,000 to 15K. In that bracket, so slightly bigger than the last one, you need to add some kind of engineered feature, probably a basin, a swale, something that's vegetated, and that's been sized and designed to treat any runoff leaving the site. The regional board has a very specific design storm for the quantity of water you have to treat before it leaves the site. Bracket 15K to 22,500, which is a little over half acre. If your net impervious is in that bracket, again, an engineered feature of some kind, probably a basin is what you're going to need. And you would have to size it to not only treat, so again, they stack, right? So to not only treat, but retain runoff into the site. The design storm you would have to use is slightly bigger, so you need a slightly bigger basin if you were in this category. And last but not least, the 4th category, 22,500 or more in big projects. Again, they stack. So if you have a project in this bracket, you're going to have to add some LID runoff reduction measures. You're going to have an engineered facility, big basin, underground chamber, something like that, that are sized to treat any runoff, retain any runoff, and you're going to have to set up a design and run calculations such that post-construction runoff doesn't exceed pre-development runoff from your site in the 2, 5, and 10-year storms.
Could that be detained/retained? Because
Great question. Detained versus retained. So you're talking, so county public improvement standards have a design called detention, which can stack with PR3. It's kind of weird how it works out. I've been working with a developer on something like that this last couple of weeks. It's kind of a niche scenario. But yeah, retain. That means whatever runoff from this design storm can't leave the site.
but it can.
Well, you'd have to have redundant storage. I can show you an example. The example I'm working on. Okay, so that project, you've evaluated your net impervious. You did the math. You've figured out which performance requirements are going to apply. before you get to designing any design work, it's really important to check the WMZ of the project. So WMZ stands for Watershed Management Zone. And these zones are all mapped, they're color coded on, you can find them on any Public Works, GeoWorks, GIS portal. So they're all mapped, they're color coded. WMZs are areas where the regional board has identified that the local water cycle has some kind of specific needs. So like in AG, the zones are colored, or identified because the water table needs to be recharged a little more quickly. Or there's some areas in the county, I know there's a big one up against the hills on the east side of, in Slovo, up against the hills where the hard dam, the bedrock is fairly shallow. And you couldn't recharge the groundwater if you wanted to, because there's rock. These are all mapped. So when you're identifying which requirements you need to comply with, check the map, figure out what the WMZ is. For some of the WMZs, certain requirements can be waived and you have to use your time. Some areas, they're more strict and you have to do something a little special because of what water does in that area. So just hop on GeoWorks, figure out what WMZ you're in, and then come talk to me, Aaron, or JR, and we can help you unpack that. Okay. So after identifying your net impervious, what requirements apply, it's really important to document how you're going to approach those requirements with your design. So like JR said, you get on any county PC and you find the tree for county intranet. It looks like the Keebler tree. You just hit that, go to our stormwater page to the forms section. So I want to make it clear, there are just three main forms that you're going to need. JR went through these already. There's the stormwater waiver, the stormwater control plan application, stormwater control plan template, just those three. The waiver and the application, fairly straightforward. They're a fill in the blanks format form. You just fill it out, sign it, file it with your project. Stormwater control plan template is a little bit more interesting for larger projects where you need an engineered facility of some kind. It's really important that you actually write a report documenting like your design narrative. Here's what the requirements are for my project. Here's what I did. Here are the calculations for the size of the basin, or any calculations for water flowing from one place to another. And you can use this template. It's pretty easy to use if you're writing such a report. What's called the stormwater control plan, SWCP. One more important thing, it's really important that such a report is stamped by a registered civil engineer. If you're your PE and your project manager, you can stamp it, or your consultant can. Those are part of the stormwater control plan, is part of the engineered content of plan set, and the regional board will look to check those during audit. Okay, so there are three forms: the waiver, the application, and then there's the template for the drafting of the report. So back to this slide, if you're in that unregulated category we were talking about, projects real small, or it's in one of the protected subcategories, you would fill out the stormwater waiver. Now, again, that was the scenario where there were no requirements. You're probably asking, if there are no requirements, why do I have to fill out anything? Once again, stormwater overlords could audit our documents. If they audited a project that we recognize was waivable, they would want to find a paper trail saying that somebody, probably the project manager, looked at the project and actually made that determination. Yes, this should be waived. Project manager, we're good to go. So it establishes a paper trail, so we can cover our tracks. If you're in that first category, PR1, you fill out the stormwater control plan application. Again, it's a super easy to use form. If you're in any of these other three, fill out the application, and you need to write stormwater control plan reports, because all of these three options, if you remember, required an engineered, specifically sized feature of some kind: basins, underground chambers, filters, as well as those kinds of things.
Hydrology.
Hydrology report would, like Jared was saying, is a separate document. It usually roughly goes with projects of the size of these three categories. So yeah, you compare that, just put them together, but yeah, they're separate documents. Okay, so one more time, there are only three documents you need to worry about: the waiver of application, and then the template that helps you write the report. And just based on this table, here's basically how you apply them. Okay, and quick shout out to County PWD, which they are already mentioned. The URL is there for you, and it's also in your slides handout if you need. It's a database that the project managers use to say, here's the timeline of my project, here's the data and details of my project. There's a little slot in there for is my project in the municipal boundary, yes, no. Here's the performance requirements I needed to abide by. And JR, Aaron, and Leslie and myself, we would use County PWD to generate reports, and here when we report to the regional water board saying, county, find this many county projects. Here's how many were in this. Here's how many were in PR4 category. Here's how many were in PR3. So it's really important that we kept updated. If you're writing your documents, just update PWD at the same time while all information, make sure everything agrees. That's enough about clarification on what the waiver is. We already went over this, but it's yeah, it's a fill in the blanks document that lists out why your project should be waived. Before, but it's not a get out stormwater free card. That actually doesn't waive anything. What's listed on it are the categories the regional board has identified are already waivable. And what you're basically doing when you fill it out is saying, my project fits into this category that is already waived, and here's why. So it actually doesn't waive anything. It's not a catch-all. The regulated scenarios are very specific, and they're listed on here verbatim. We've typed them on here verbatim from the regional board literature, so it's very specific. Just read through really quickly when you're filling it out, and don't try to file it when it doesn't apply. So all these documents, when you should be preparing them, answer as early as humanly possible. So 100% required. You must include all your stormwater documents with a submittal to planning and building department. The waiver and application definitely important, but it's really critical when it's the report. Because that's a part of the engineered content. Your submittals to planning and building department get routed to JR's division for review if you're trying to get a building permit for a facility or something. If any of these documents are missing, automatically he's going to have comments saying resubmit this with reply to comments because we don't have all the pieces. So it's really important that those be included. Strongly encourage as early as possible while you're doing your preliminary planning and design. For capital room projects, have at least the waiver application ready if you have. I get it if it's one of the larger category projects, you're going to need to generate a report that early in the game during preliminary. You may not have all the engineering done for whatever basin or filters you're going to need. But these two, especially the application, at least outline for you and help you just walk through which categories apply. And then if you have to, you can pass that off to your designer, consultant, and say, hey, here's the things we need, and they can draft a report from there. But as early in the game as you can, it at least helps you start planning so that you don't design yourself to the corner. Because what you don't want to happen is start filling out your paperwork late in the game and realize you needed the basins you didn't plan for, and then start trying to squeeze things in that may not actually work for late in the game. Plan this through early. You can plan how to lay out your site in such a way that you've left room for everything you need. That I give you a number.
Great, thank you. Well, my name is Aaron Yonker, and I work in project delivery. I'm also one of the SMEs that was mentioned earlier, so I just wanted to, along with J.R. Beard and Jeffrey San Nicholas, I just wanted to take a second. This is heavy stuff. It's confusing, so if there's any questions after this presentation, you want to take a deeper dive, or there's maybe something that wasn't clear, you have additional questions, or a project that you're working on, please come and see us. We're happy to help, and we want to see your projects succeed. So this is Okay, so I'm going to be talking about these two topics here today, and I'm also going to be introducing a new document that we prepared in conjunction with the D-30 update, and that is the Opportunity and Constraints Checklist. And that document works in conjunction with an existing document that we already have that is currently required for like PCR 3 and 4, the bigger projects, which is the Opportunity and Constraints map. And so basically these two forms work together, and they really are intended to get the PCR portion of the design project up really in the front end of the project, instead of what Jeffrey just mentioned. A lot of times this gets done at the very end and it's tried to squeeze in. So I'll be talking a little bit more about both those objects, both those documents here in a second. So basically this training is intended for everybody in the room, but this portion of what I'm going to cover is really covered for these three type of county staff criteria, and that would be the county PM that's working with the in-house design team on a project that has PCR compliance requirements. It's also the county PM that's working with an outside consultant, design consultant, or an architect that has a project that has PCR performance requirements. It's also the county REs and the inspection crews that are overseeing the construction. While they're not going to be involved in the early portion of this part of it, the checklist and the mapping, they are going to be overseeing the construction that happens later on. We're setting up a lot of those project controls that they're going to be then enforcing later. So those are the main people that are kind of involved here. Before I get too far into it, I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit and kind of refresh our understanding of, what are the PCRs? How do they apply to us? What's it mean to even be in compliance? And so what you're seeing here is an exhibit, and on each side are two very differing site conditions. On the left, you have that natural environment that is yet to be developed. You can see it's full of vegetation, undisturbed soils that have yet to be compressed and compacted. Probably a really healthy root mat underneath all that vegetation that holds a lot of the bugs and the biomes that are responsible for that water quality and treatment that happens in the natural environment. Over on the right, you have a very developed condition, and those soils are most certainly disturbed. They've probably been over-excavated, scarified, recompacted, heavy structures placed on top of them. A lot of that root mat and vegetation that you see in the undeveloped condition has been cleared and grubbed and removed, compacted, heavy equipment's been driven over it, and it's been replaced with an impermeable surface. So when we take a look at this in terms of the hydrological processes that we're looking at, which is really the basis of what PCR compliance is, capturing the stormwater and treating the stormwater, what we see in an undeveloped condition is that the majority of that water that lands has the ability to infiltrate down into the ground. High percentage of it, up in some cases up to half of that water, it's going to make its way into that shallow area where the roots are there to clean it and treat it. It's going to work its way down into the groundwater and further down in. You can also see that a good high percentage of it is available for evaporation, transpiration through those plants. It's going to turn back into rainwater and then somewhere else. In a developed condition, it's the exact opposite. So what's happened is we've disturbed all those soils, we've compacted them, we placed that impermeable membrane, if you will, all the concretes and asphalts and parking structures and buildings that prevents that from happening. And we've also treated that stormwater like liability. We capture it as quickly as we can. We channelize it. We try to get it off site before it forms a project nuisance, which is probably common and embarrassing. But that's the conventional way that we've always designed projects. And you can see the big thing there is, again, we have a very high infiltration potential on an undeveloped site. We're very low. You can see it's dropped to maybe 15% in some of these high density conditions. And then really what to point out is that what used to be just a very slight amount of that water running off site, now the majority of that water is leaving the site. It's also leaving the site at a higher velocity. It's carrying lots of sediments, lots of pollutants, and it's polluting those waterways downstream. And that's basically causing big issues. So the approach that the Water Board has taken on this is to implement these PCR requirements. And basically what they've decided to do is kind of create a hybrid of these two scenarios. And really the PCRs can be boiled down to two real main fundamentals. And that is, the first one is preserving as much of that natural environment as you can in the developed condition. So actually preserving those areas on site, don't let them get destroyed, don't let them get run over by heavy equipment, don't let them get cleared and drugged out of the way for the contractor to construct. And the other one is go ahead and do your development, insert all the impermeable areas, your buildings, your surface spaces that you need to create that development, but then insert structural control measures, BMPs, with engineered soils and various conditions that can then replicate this existing condition. But because they are engineered soils, they do them on a much smaller basis. So kind of squeeze that site in there with everything that we need and and get it to work. So problem solved, right? Well, not entirely. Because PCR compliance is difficult. It's just not an easy thing. And one of the things that makes it difficult is that it's relatively new. It's not something that we understand very well. It's not something that we've seen a lot of. It's been out for about 8 years now, but we have a very conventional mindset when it comes to developing sites. And the way that we do that is we typically take a look at the topography, we take a look at the survey, we try to establish where we're going to need cuts and fills, we take a look at the geotechnical, figure out what our soils are going to have to do so we can put these structures and our roadways and sidewalks on there and have them last throughout the duration of the project. And we've never had to think about stormwater. And when we did, we thought of in a way of just trying to get it off site and removing it. So what the PCRs are doing now is coming back and saying, well, don't get rid of that water, keep it, we need it. And so it's a very different mindset than we're used to doing. And so it's hard. So basically the opportunity and constraints checklist that we developed in conjunction with the map is really intended to kind of break that mindset. Instead of waiting till the very end of the project, got this beautiful project that meets all the project goals, and how are we going to make this PCR compliance work? Where can we fit them in? We know that results in a lot of rework, a lot of extra costs, a lot of things that don't work, things that change construction. So the opportunity and constraints map is really a guidance document that helps all of us set these projects up and take a look at the PCR requirements early on in the project. So it guides that concept and design, and it also provides a means to assist the county staff during the plan check and review period. So we can see in a really clear paper trail, how things were considered and how it was lined out, and what works and what doesn't work. So let's see. So again, the opportunity constraints map it's a new document. I'm going to kind of go over it here in just a second, but it really focuses on really kind of drawing attention to these existing things, which are really in the spirit of the PCR compliance order. That existing vegetation, those drainage areas, how is it naturally draining now? How can we integrate a site that doesn't change that drastically? It takes a look at required setbacks. Those setbacks are from water wells. You can't infiltrate water within 100 feet of a well. 10 feet off of building foundations, so you're not undermining the building foundations. And it takes a look at all these areas and kind of walks the developer through that and the design teams through that, and creates, eventually leads to a map. All these areas get hatched out through polygons and kind of tells us areas that are great opportunities for PCRs, as well as those areas that are constraints that you can't put a BMP or some type of water quality control into. And again, it's to break that mentality of waiting to the very end, it's costly and requires a lot of extra effort. So the goal is to get this in the early days of the design and have it work with the architects and designers at the same time. So here's basically what the document looks like. This is the opportunity constraints checklist. It sounds like extra work. It's not. It's actually intended to reduce later work. So if you kind of take a clear, concise approach at the system design, it's going to be a much smoother, easy process to get approval. So basically the way that this is set up is there's a starting introduction that talks about the purpose and need, why we have to do this. There's a quick little instruction, how to use this checklist, what the method is we'll be using. And then it starts walking through each one of those elements, the existing vegetation. It provides a little bit of a background, goals you should shoot for, things you should try to achieve in your project design. In this case, existing vegetation, preserve or minimize disturbance, as much as feasible, designs that integrate natural features into the project site are better at mimicking pre-development runoff conditions. So all these things that kind of work towards PCR compliance, surveying and site topography. Below each one of those is a checklist that this isn't a right or wrong, this isn't you did it wrong, or it's not a compliance thing, this is a guidance document. It's supposed to help you and as you're setting this out, working with the designers, whether that's in-house or out-of-house. And it's often for these larger projects, but you can see, we took a look at the high quality vegetation. We took a look at the existing trees. Do we want to save them? Do they provide shade benefit? Do we want to put something out there like ESA fencing during construction that will prevent that contractor from either knocking those trees down or driving all over the root structures? So it kind of walks through that process there. Does the same thing through each of these. It talks about the soil, how important that soil is. You don't want to just have the contractor come in and clear and grow the entire site to make it easy for themselves and then construct that site. If there's areas out there that have really good vegetation that you don't need to develop on, you want to preserve that, you want to put fencing around it, you want to call outs on your on your construction documents. So these are the very first steps to kind of help us get there. So basically you would develop this checklist, go through all of these, take a look at the geotechnical analysis. Is there liquefaction? Are there soils that are better for infiltration than others? Do we want to target those areas for BMPs? We won't want to have a very small section of property that is excellent for infiltration and put our building around and do all that. If we can't avoid it, we can't avoid it. We'll find other ways to do it. But if that area can be preserved for stormwater treatment, that's where we want to put it. Again, it takes a look at those setbacks, making sure that we're off and away from building foundations, making sure that we're not near water wells or riparian areas or waterways. Takes a look at the hydrological features and runs through all of it. It takes a look at, will the site have any pollutants that we need to worry about? Are there existing pollutants out there, fueling stations, et cetera, that we want to try to avoid and stay away from before we put, we don't want to bring that stuff into the groundwater as we set these up. And then basically, it eventually will help you get to the point where you can kind of determine which PCR you need to meet. And basically, it's going to be one of the ones that Jeffrey talked about based on the size of the project, how much impervious space we have. So again, this document, it's not a single document you fill in a single day. This starts kind of day one of the project. As the topography is coming in, the survey investigation comes in, you're going to use that data. As the geotechnical information is coming in, you're going to use that data. Site visits, you're going to use that data. Google Earth, you're going to use that data. You're going to just kind of slowly be checking this little stuff and heading there. Okay, so let's see where I'm at. So again, so once that list is completed, once you've compiled all that data, you've done your assessment, what that leads to is the opportunity constraints map. This is an existing condition in the LID manual. This is reserved typically for those PR3 and PR4 projects. Those are the much larger projects, the ones that either have to retain the water in their entirety on site, or the ones that have to discharge from the site at a pre-existing condition for the larger storms. Some of the stuff that Jeffrey talked about. And basically, it maps those opportunities and those constraints associated with PCR compliance. So again, at the end of the day, you're left with a map that you begin hatching out and saying, well, we definitely can't put anything in here. We definitely want to try to preserve this area. We definitely can't put it here. And you start working with the architects and the developers to say, well, can we squeeze our building like this? Can we fit our ingress and egress, our EDA path of travel, our parking areas? Can we work them into the site and kind of take a holistic approach to these PCR compliances? Again, kind of flipping the script on what it used to be, which is that conventional approach. Let's just lay out the project and, oh yeah, here's these PCR requirements that came out recently. How can we make that work too? So it kind of takes a holistic approach. And the other thing it does, it actually helps protect those proposed BMPs during the construction activities. So as you're going through and identifying these areas that are great vegetation areas, that are great soil conditions, we don't want the contractor to come in and just run heavy equipment over them, loaders and excavators and just trash those and compact them. So we go out and get a geotechnical evaluation. We've got great infiltration on site. We've got a great place to store this water, get it into the ground, and meet the PCR requirements. But by the time construction's over, it's entirely compacted, and we can't do that. So we build it anyways. 6 months later, a year later, the water board's driving by and sees it, and it's not draining. Now we got mosquitoes, and they're calling up in the phone and saying, "What's going on with us? We wanted to do an audit." And then so everything's great until you get an audit, and those audits do happen. We've had a few here at the county, and we've had to pay a few fines. So again, this is all just a procedure to kind of make it work. So at the end of the day, this is just an example. This isn't necessarily what it needs to look like. It can look like anything. Typically, you would basically, when the topography comes in, you get the information back from the surveyors. You basically use the base files. You would have the project limits. You'd have the utilities mapped out on there. You'd have, you'd start mapping these areas out. And really what you're intended to do is through that checklist, you've identified those riparian areas and waterways that need to be protected from contaminants. And, so that stream that's passing that project site, you've identified there's a well on site. I can't be anywhere within 100 feet of a well and put water in the ground because I'll potentially contaminate that water with pollutants picking up. So you would draw a 100-foot radius around that well. There's no BMPs going in there. that might be an area to maybe put some of your parking or some other areas of the project, and kind of you're doing that balance here. You've identified vegetation that is worth saving, large trees that are providing shade, good root structure. We're not knocking those down if possible. We've identified those slopes that are going to be subjected to potentially erosion, that aren't going to be great for BMPs, and we've excluded them out. So we put a hatch around that area there. We've identified an area that might be a really good candidate for BMPs. And again, we want to mark that out there. So as we're developing our construction plans, this is a layer in there that they can see, okay, this is an area that we definitely want to save. We can't really be throwing our building or a parking lot there without taking other precautions or finding a different way. And then obviously we're working at the same time with the developers to make sure that we do have our buildings in place at the right locations. We've got project ingress and egress, parking, and all those things, but we're trying to work them together at the same time. So at the end of the day, you have this map. This map is guiding the design. It's also, once it is all done, the notes that you're capturing, you're telling contractors not to, maybe this area here, you have really good vegetation, no clearing, grubbing, no heavy equipment, that sort of thing. Areas that you tagged out for your BMPs, no heavy equipment, and dig only sort of thing. And so at the end of the day, what it's really doing is it's kind of guiding that site layout, and it's preserving those favorable areas. So it's identifying those areas that are favorable. It's incorporating them into the design process early, when everybody's involved, without having to go back and rework these areas, without having to get to construction and saying, this isn't going to work, and what are we going to do, where are we going to move it? But equally important, it's also providing project control, and this is something that we don't always have on our plans, is if we have a really good area out there that's porous, it's great for infiltration, we really don't want the contractors sticking big heavy things of, dirt out there, they're rocks, and they're class 2 base dump. We don't want dump trucks running over that. So we would, tag that area out and say no heavy equipment, give them a laydown area somewhere else, or work with them at that time. Or if we don't give them a laydown area, at least designate where they can't lay down. Same thing with equipment and supplies. We wouldn't want them coming and unloading heavy equipment and supplies right where we're intending to infiltrate. If there's great trees or vegetation on site that we want to make sure that we preserve, the opportunity constraints map is where we first identify that, and we indicate with notes, place notes on the construction drawings that we need some type of PSA fencing to put in place to make sure the contractor, one, is not driving their heavy equipment through there, not knocking down the trees, or again, just clearing the whole entire site. As you can see, might be happening here, and then having a clean palette and construct the site. So again, the main two premises of the PCR, when you boil it all down, take the existing conditions and incorporate them into the final design. And where you can't do that, then bring in the engineered BMPs and infiltration galleries and what have you, with engineered soils that require a much smaller footprint, but also mimic the pre-developed conditions. So, okay, so basically putting that into the real world, you take that map and you put project controls in place, you develop a map. At the end of the day, here's the project that's all said and done. Kind of going back and seeing what we might have done in the beginning, we would have set aside this area here potentially as like, hey, this is a great green area. We don't need to put our development there. We don't want the contractor destroying that area. It takes a long time to build that up in terms of all the bacteria and everything that's in that soil matrix that provides that water quality. You can't just strip it clean and put it back in place and have that same quality happening. So we might have these little buffer zones at the project limits. We've identified areas that might be really good for BMP locations. We've provided direction in there not to put heavy equipment across those. We can lay that out in the field. Another one would have been there, I guess, where we can see there's a bit of a retention area there. We've also worked with the developers to lay out the building and all the ingress and egress and EDA path of travel and parking in such a way that it doesn't destroy it. It's kind of that holistic approach. We have maybe potentially designated these areas. Hey, we know they're going to clear and grub. This is where you want to lay down your equipment. This is where you want to have your concrete trucks wash out. This is where you want to lay down your materials. This is where you want to store your materials at night when you park your vehicles. Not up here, definitely down here. So we're providing that guidance that really helps holistically kind of develop that site. Now, granted, this is for a much larger project. We typically use this checklist. We're going to be using it along with the map, the PCR 3 and 4s, which are the much bigger projects, something like this. If you're just improving sidewalks or putting an underground infiltrator on a smaller project, obviously this one would apply. It would help. It can certainly be used, but it's mainly going to be for the ones where you actually have to retain all the water on site or discharge at a certain volume that matches the pre-existing conditions. So it's going to be these 15,000 square feet of impervious area and larger type projects. So talking about some of the planning and design, a lot of this stuff I've kind of already covered, but it's just kind of a real quick walkthrough. These bolded things are really the areas to kind of focus on. We want to come in and, as much as possible, utilize the existing site layout. So if that water is draining a certain way, don't cut and fill and try to redo the whole site. Try to use that site as much as possible. Again, reserve those areas with the high permeable soils. We don't want to be trashing them and coming back later saying, well, now what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? Keep those trees if you can. Avoid areas that are susceptible to erosion. Try to stay away from the banks. Concentrate or cluster development in less sensitive areas of the project site. Every site is unique. You can take the same project, you can build it at one location, take it to another location, build the same exact thing somewhere else. It's going to be a completely different project, completely different change orders. That's because each site is unique. And so you really kind of have to work with these sites. Again, maintain a surface pattern, the surface flow patterns. Reserve areas with high permeability, incorporate, again, some of this is repeating self-concentrate. Maintain existing topography, maximize trees, promote natural vegetation by using parking lot islands, integrate vegetation. And something to point out is, this again is a guidance document. PCR compliance is mandated through the water board and through our permit that we hold with them, but it doesn't trump over our county codes and building codes and stuff like that. We wouldn't ever say, this is ideal for BMP. Let's put the building on top of the hill. Let's cut down the hill. We still need to do things in order that they have to be done, which would be code requirements and what have you first. But these, again, instead of waiting to the very end, what we're trying to do is flip the script, get to PCRs incorporated early on in the project. And so, that just kind of pointing that out, that keeping that in mind as we go.
Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. This is a lot of information to go through. Realize that. It's critical, though. I mean, as far as Anne's concerned, or we're concerned, all of us, a lot of this information is born from notice of violations that are handed to partner jurisdictions, and Anne's in coordination with those jurisdictions. So whenever this jurisdiction gets an NOV, we get that. We go, okay, how are we going to change things? What are we doing now? So that's the importance of this meeting. Just want to share that with everybody. That the reason we're doing this is we're trying to get in more alignment with what's been going on recently with other jurisdictions and what we had to go through not too long ago with our notice of violation. So very important information. That's why we're jumping through this, and we appreciate everybody's attention to it. Great quote here by Julia Morgan. My buildings will be my legacy. They will speak for me long after I'm gone. So with that, let's jump into the last part of this presentation. Operations and maintenance provisions are built into the requirements. So this is very important for for what would be private development projects, but also it's applicable to county projects, very much so. The PCR has included an entire section requiring that the county ensure continued operation and maintenance of the SCM, structural control measures. The O&M requirements apply to both public and private facilities, so it's not unique to one or the other. The Planning and Building Department administers a program to meet these requirements. So as I mentioned previously, if you're submitting a building permit application, as far as like a facility or a parking lot, gets routed to the building department, they're administering that already. And then we have our capital improvement projects internally that we're administering and tracking through the PWD project database. So 2 different houses, so to speak, 2 different departments monitoring this and keeping track of these things. So maintenance plans, they have to account for costs and maintenance schedules. Transportation projects and facility projects follow different tracks of operations and maintenance. Different kind of facilities, different kind of track, right? In all cases, the county must maintain maintenance plans, inspection records, and maintenance records. It's critical. So for new facilities such as that of buildings, which again, we are having new facilities built now, and there's going to be new facilities built in the future. Collaboration is needed with the planning, building, parks department and other departments, or whoever's going to be occupying that facility. That coordination needs to happen. Maintenance agreement must be completed and documented with planning and building as part of the permit process. And again, that's for building permit applications. The building department is administering that. Be prepared to submit operations and maintenance documents during the permitting process. That's critical because we have Anthony Schutz with the building department who's reviewing these O&M agreements, plans, and so forth to make sure that everything is in compliance and everything's checked off the list. And then it gets filed with the project with the planning and building department. Transportation projects, very critical. Collaborate early with roads and transportation to ensure that O&M requirements are feasible and well documented via staff. So Tim K, he's going to be, it's going to be a road improvement project, and he's going to be the one that's going to be mowing vegetative swale. He needs to know what the O&M is going to be on that, so we can account for staff and cost on an annual basis. So again, through the, as Jeffrey called it, the keyword tree, get in there and you can have access to all these forms that we've gone over. Specific here are these two items. We have public facilities maintenance memo that explains the roles of the different departments, like Don's department, for instance. Also, what's coming soon will be a maintenance agreement template. We don't have that in place yet. We're working on that now. All right, that said, you guys survived. Do you have any questions? Yes. Aaron.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. This is a good presentation, but I guess my questions are more specific. So I guess starting at the top, and you talked about this, Jeffrey, there's this nuance between what is replacement and what's new. And that, like, for our bridge projects, is critical, that difference, because if it's a replacement or if it's new, it doesn't matter. We wind up for a small bridge project with 2.5 acres of replacement, and because we're doing 200, 400 feet on each side of the bridge, and then all of a sudden in a rural area we're building massive bioretention basins with a 50-foot right-of-way. It's almost infeasible, but it can't be infeasible, right? As Aaron said. So what is a replacement? When is it a replacement and when is it not? You mentioned overlay. Is that a replacement or no?
So like I mentioned, there are the two main scenarios. Accounts.
Yeah.
One is they're increasing permeability, so that's not really on side of things we're looking at. The other is replacements that aren't aligning grade. Aligning grade is kind of a fancy term. It's the board came up with that for places like parking where replacing parking lot slope the exact same way, exact same amount of runoff is going to corners.
So if you cut, if you cut it completely, but it still has the same line and grade, but you're doing a full road replacement, then it doesn't count as a replacement because it's maintaining the line and grade.
That's
Well,
or you're saying things.
no, you're touching.
Done. That's all I needed to hear.
If you're touching if you're rebuilding the structural section of the road, then it counts. So if you're just stripping off the pavement, then no. As soon as you touch that base, sub base subsequently, that's what's it.
So is that the event horizon, the sub base or the base?
That's actually a determination we made a couple years ago. It came up with like a parking lot projects that I was working on in design. It's like doing these overlays, like, hey, we're going to do these dig outs. Steve mentioned earlier. It's sure you can do dig outs, dig off the top, dig off the pavement cap, and that's all you can do. But as soon as you touch the structural component of it, the base, full section, that's triggering replacement. So yeah, so it's not just. Where am I going with that? No, you gotta be careful about it. Yeah.
So maintenance is typically like excluded like this.
Right, yeah.
So if you're gonna come in and just say you're just gonna go grinding over the road, that's all intent. Sure. Maintenance is stuff more, now we're gonna put it back right for us. That's not a replacement, so you're gonna have to do some other quality issues. And kind of taking a step away from bridges because they're complicated. Like if you had a site and that site had like, say that a small single family home that's in a driveway, you're going to demolish that and build something else. that would be a replacement. So like, you can't say like, well, there's a driveway there, we're putting something else, we can pull that area out. Like, that's a replacement, replacing with something nuclear. So like, that's kind of where the replacement falls in. Like, operation and maintenance, like just coming in and grinding over, like, putting everything back the way it was. That's something seriously.
But that's, I mean, for our roadways, I mean, that's often the decision we have to make is how much are we just gonna take off an inch or two of the asphalt and just replace that asphalt, or are we gonna do a full section replacement? So it sounds like there's a bit of a gray area
Yeah,
there. And who's making, is that the region, obviously the regional board doesn't,
we're administrative, so we're actually making that
so we
determination.
have to make that determination.
Yeah, so that's why the determination we made is like this whole, as their extension of the maintenance. So you're just stripping off the top cap and then just the AC, more of a maintenance. It's a gray area, that's usually touch the base. Now you're replacing the full structure section. Now it's more of a replacement as opposed to being a maintenance cap.
Yeah, if you made it through the PCRs after the it's complicated and it's really open for interpretation. It's not super clear. So like in each permittee, like the county, each city has to hold a separate application permit with the water board. So they become like responsible. So there's that interpretation. They have to develop guidelines that at a base minimum meet the requirements of the water work seat. So like a lot of that was on whether it's conversation you can strike with the water board and you answer, or whether it's have to make your own determination. County is partly made their own determination in some areas.
Okay. Well, and maybe as a follow-up, maybe I can talk about that with you guys individually, because what's happening is that demarcation line makes our bridge projects basically the same as a brand new housing development. We are in the PTR 4 category for every bridge in a rural area. So we should probably talk about that.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of that nuance is hugely critical to the cost of work that.
I agree. It really expands the confidence there.
Yeah, and there are other factors that can be taken into consideration with assessors, like independent offsetting, things like that. There are other things that can be done, but it's a very tricky conversation. It's all about being convinced to the water board. So yeah, if you definitely have those kind of questions, feel free to put the team together. It's very complicated. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
For larger, master planning efforts, when you have a large site and multiple projects, but you're only going to proceed with one component, for the stormwater perspective, are you looking at all of the master planning efforts or just kind of that one project that's being designed?
That is great.
Not what you should do.
I mean,
Yeah.
the water board discourages breaking down the new project to make it compliant. You can't just break off pieces. But if the true intent is that you've got this 20-year master plan, it's for longer. I would think each one of those might be. Maybe it depends on what.
That'd be a case-by-case decision, because, yeah, if you're planning on doing one thing in 5 years, that might be different than everything in 20 years, because, like, there's gonna be a new permit coming out in 2023, so regulations could change. So, yeah, those kind of questions, you definitely want to feel the picture, because that's another barrier. But ultimately, we determine project site, so you're looking at your project site. So, there's a master plan phase, and further discussion will be required. Because regulations could change.
Yeah, I was just going to point out how much overlap there is in what you guys are talking about for the work that we do in environmental. And so while we don't do the technical analysis, we get asked a lot by project managers, environmental, do you guys do stormwater? And the answer is no, we definitely don't. We don't have technical expertise, but we know it's something and we know it needs to be done. And the issues that we're running into is that our environmental review is getting out in front of the stormwater discussion and calculations. So we're getting caught saying, don't worry, we're going to handle stormwater. We know there's these rules. Risking the same thing that you guys are talking about, which is once you figure it out, your site design might actually change, or those trees that we thought were going to provide some aesthetic value actually need to come out. And so just, I guess, reiterate what you guys have said to the project managers, how important it is to try and tackle this early. And I'm hoping that there is some more formal way to do that, whether it's in the PEP, whether it's in the standard RFPs that we're giving to consultants who are designing things for us, so that when we get asked hey, kick off your environmental review or get that draft document out, we have some basic level of calculation that says, here's the things that are going to be required of our project. We know we can do it on site because of X, Y, and Z. Here's conceptually how it could work. And then we'll have that in our documentation. We can do the other things that we need to analyze, knowing where those stormwater improvements are going to happen. And it's parallel in my mind to the idea of staging. Where a lot of times we're like, whoa, where's all the staging going to happen, right? And it's kind of the last minute. Well, it's going to be offsite. It's going to be there. This is the exact same thing. And so just pointing that out, I know project managers have a ton of stuff they're trying to balance on these little sites now. This is just another one of those things that we appreciate you guys saying this needs to be incorporated, like pretty much from day one, beyond everyone's
Hey,
radar.
Keith,
Yeah.
so the permit summary form, this items, there's no box, check box.
It's too late. Yeah, if we're in permit summary form, you've already gone through environmental review. We have,
But should we have it on there though? Because even though it starts early, we should have some permit summary. Yeah, this has been taken.
It just says to review your stormwater requirements. That's all it would say.
Well, just a reminder, hey, there's this. Well, I guess that's for contractors.
yeah, I think you're too late.
Yeah,
I mean, the project description at that point, it's just like, make sure you put in 40 parking spaces, you know, it's like.
yeah, that's design.
Yeah, we're past that.
Yeah,
So,
okay. Sometimes there's measures in there that talk, that not specifically to post-construction stormwater, but there's talk about polymers or water pollution control, or switch or something like that. Yeah. So I don't think that's really what you're after, but it's contract.
so I don't know if there can be some project, project manual or some sort of standard, like you can get this, you can get this step in the process.
Yeah, we've started talking about that to Keith's point, everybody. So, project execution, the PEPs and the project charters, like project charter, when PM goes to Don, here's the project we're dealing with, that's just like a very basic scoping document. By that time, it's like Don's asking to do something. All right, this is MS4, so you're doing a very quick synopsis. Hey, look, stormwater is going to be a thing here. Project manager and Don are going to work together to figure out what that looks like. The the PEPs, if you're doing a road project, you definitely are going to want to catch that early. I mean, you're already putting that document together, that scoping document, it's got a budget to it. Stormwater stuff can be very expensive. So, you think about putting in a bioretention basin or pervious pavers, which would be more in a parking lot situation as opposed to a road project, but you could have bioretention basins in the roadway. So, SEMs for stormwater can be very pricey or costly rather. So you definitely need to account for it early.
So example, North River Road by San Miguel, we widened and we had to come up with a solution for the treatment. There's no room anywhere, no property, but they did allow us to go into town and do infiltrators in the town at various locations. So that they're off-site mitigation ways.
Yeah, that's what.
In some.
Yeah, it's kind of the discussion we had with Aaron with his bridge projects. But yeah, there's offsetting, but that is a very tricky road to.
Take them out
To
to
go.
lunch and talk to them.
Yeah.
And just to kind of echo Keith's statement, I mean, we are really looking to get this stuff brought in with much of the project through the PEPs, like JR just mentioned, through the charters, with a discussion and a clear understanding of what we think it's going to be. We're also at the same time updating all the manuals, so we have a current quality manual. It's currently being updated. We have an outside contractor that's working on it. I think it's probably about a year out.
About a year out.
So all of these things that we're talking about now, the updating constraints map, the checklist, all these things are going to be incorporated into that, and it's going to be part of the review and approval process. So we're seeing this stuff up front. So hopefully we are catching that stuff early. I can't stress out enough. I do agree that we need to get this stuff on the front side. That's going to avoid a lot of issues. We start working with project sites early on. It gets super complicated super quick. So the earlier we can work on stuff.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
I want to stay below 2,500 square feet.
No.
I actually do most of my stuff.
Okay.
I calculate that on topographic area or so.
Topographic horizontal. Did I say that? Quote unquote, yeah. Horizontal. Anybody else? Yes.
Yes, so you mentioned that for certain projects, even if it's out of an MS4 area, if you have to get a regional board permit, they may require the post-construction requirements anyways. Right. What is that based on? Because I've seen projects that require it sometimes and don't require it out of the MS4 area. What's the, what's the rationale for some and not others?
Other than it being the water board, I don't know the rationale.
I think, I'm not entirely sure. I think if it's outside of the MS4 area, then it applies to the general permit. General construction permit, I think has PCR requirements in there. The general construction permit is the one that sets up all the requirements for like the SWIP, the greater than an acre. And the walls, so that really addresses damage that might occur during construction, that erosion of water and big storms, but they also have, I think, post-construction requirements. So if you land outside of that area, you would hear that. And I don't know them well enough to know whether there's a mechanism that you trigger them and doesn't trigger them, or
I think in some cases, the mechanism, we apply for water quality certification from the regional board, and they use that as that's how they become aware of a project.
But that's like almost every project, right?
Bridge project.
That's for end of the answer, so you can reach out to.
do you know, I know you don't have that one, right? Have more strict
It's personally, it's not written in creative detail. Like the big set up 4 categories. It's a really basic, post development discharges balanced with 3 and 8% as well. And that's it. How that pencils out on the list for kids.
Okay.
That was just treated as a 404 strip, but that's a one of the most of the construction firm itself. So you're going to probably balance with those contents and that for the service. So as I know, that needs to project. Eventually, that's not a problem. Okay. Anybody else with any questions? Really good questions. Thank you.
Or let's say vegetated bioswales, does the water quality board require post-construction monitoring or annual reporting to ensure like vegetation success?
Excellent question. So conceive of, so kind of it's a structure control measure or a low impact development measure. So there's 2 different things. So the LID measure doesn't necessarily require it on hand. As soon as it becomes a structure control measure, then you have the LID. And back to those 4 squares, you're just applying the first square. You don't really care for any of the other 3.
And just something's worth maybe pointing out again, is that these O&M maintenance agreements support the water board are in perpetuity, the life of the project. So it's different in the vein that, like, typically when we say hire a design consultant, they prepare the plans and stamp it. That design's on them, even though we're plan checking it, it's still on them. The permit, because we hold a permit with the water board, they're our project. So even if an outside consultant is designing the system and fails, it's still on us. The NOV comes to us, and it's in perpetuity. So it could be 5 years from now. You could have the unfortunate luck of designing a project next door to a water board. Someone lives next door to a project and retire mosquitoes because your project's creating water that's steaming. So you got to call on what project?
I think that's where you have to really show, if they're looking for proof that you have to show as part of your operation and maintenance plan is to maintain that. Is that, I mean, this is what part of our SOP, and this is what part of that is taking care of this project, that construction is.
Yes, and so to, I guess, supplement that, like sometimes we, field conditions aren't always what works on paper. So you might have to say, you have a basin, calc show the basin is going to drain in, 3 days. Turns out it drains in 8 days. Now you have mosquito issues and vector control issues. This actually happens. It's like, hey, there's standing water in this thing. With us and what's going on. Your structural control, your SCM has failed. Fix it, So it's it just varies, and you got to be careful. That's why they're like what we shared today is essentially an iceberg, right? So it's what we shared today at the peak, and there's a whole bit of the stormwater stuff still under the water.
Part of it is just make stuff that works, right?
Make stuff that works, yeah. Make stuff that works in perpetuity.
So what is how's this work then? Because, I mean, clearly we have projects going on, and as we start adding more bio retention basins sporadically throughout the county, I mean, it's going to significantly increase the maintenance requirements of our staff.
Yeah.
Or is that being budgeted for?
That's what we need to take into consideration now. So, and that's still an ongoing conversation between Ann and leadership as far as, but right now, the line of thought is we don't want chambers because that requires a little bit more on it. So
Surface structures are the easiest things to maintain right now because who's going to be maintaining them? So in the case of public works, it's going to be roads. So I'm looking at our consultants to handle those things. But because of the Parks project, they have an underground basin, like chamber of some sort. Somebody's going to have to pay for the annual maintenance on that thing as well as inspections. So that's an ongoing big conversation because these things can be expensive to annually track. It's got to be taken into account. It's got to go like roads. As soon as we put it in this app, here's your budget. Here's what's going to cost. 5,000 a year for man hours. But it's got all the money for this app. The same thing if Don gets a new building, moving into that facility, they're going to have to. That new facility has underground chambers. They're going to have to account for it in their budget for using much more.
Well, it's all based on how complex it is. Like the one few that we have, they just require that the O&M on them is just clean it, just making sure that and not modifying it and keeping debris and that kind of thing out of it.
Yeah.
But these are pretty simple. It's just it's almost like we treat it like part of the landscape. And we maintain it like we would landscape. We just don't let it, we don't want a bunch of invasive weeds in there. We don't want to let the debris get it. But when you start talking about what you're talking about, where it's SCMs that have a lot of elements to them and something you're going to be familiar with, and then how are you documenting that you're taking care of it, and how are you proving? And then again, if it fails.
Yeah, thanks. So you need a budget for that. That's all about program. Any other questions? Seeing none. All right. Thank you, everybody. So thank you guys. So subject matter experts, Jeffrey, Aaron, myself. Yay, here we go. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Aaron.